I can feel the energy tonight. They're all here for you.
80,000 people were on their feet. The score was tied. There were 11 minutes left on the clock, and Ronaldinho, the most gifted soccer player on the planet at that moment, the man every camera in the stadium was pointed at, suddenly dropped the ball. Not because he was hurt, not because the referee blew the whistle, not because his body gave out. He just stopped, stood completely still for 3 full seconds in the middle of the field, like someone had pressed pause on the entire universe. And then he turned and started walking. Not toward his teammates, not toward the bench, not toward the referee who was already jogging over with his arms raised and his mouth open. Toward the stands. Nobody in that stadium understood what they were watching. Not the 80,000 fans, not the coaches, not the players on both teams who froze in place like they were waiting for someone to explain the rules of a game they had never played before. The television cameras swung wildly, trying to figure out what to follow. The commentators went silent. And somewhere up in the north section of the upper deck, a man sitting completely alone in the middle of a roaring crowd had absolutely no idea that a World Cup champion was walking directly toward him. What happened in the next 6 minutes would never appear in any official highlight package. It would never be mentioned in any post-game press conference. It would never show up in the statistics that journalists typed into their laptops on the way home. But every single person who witnessed it says the exact same thing when you ask them about it years later. They say it was the most important moment they ever experienced inside a soccer stadium. And they say it was the first time in their lives they truly understood what this sport was actually for. To understand how we got to that moment, you have to go back exactly 72 hours. 3 days before the match. His name was Daniel Herrera. He was 54 years old. He had thick hands and a quiet voice, and the kind of face that has seen more than it was ever built to carry. He had driven 4 hours that morning from a small town, parked his truck outside the city, and taken the subway to the training facility of the club his son had loved more than almost anything else in the world. He had not planned what he was going to say when he got there. He had no appointment. He had no contact. He had nothing except a worn leather bag over his shoulder and a handwritten note folded into his shirt pocket that he had been carrying for 8 months without knowing exactly when he was going to use it. His son, Thomas, had died the previous spring. He was 26 years old. He had served 2 tours overseas and come home both times, and everyone who loved him had breathed out with relief. And then he went back a 3rd time, and he did not come home. Daniel had received the phone call on a Tuesday morning while he was eating breakfast. He had not finished that breakfast. He would never describe what the following weeks felt like, because he said there were no words in any language that came close enough to be useful. But he could describe Thomas. He could describe him for hours. Thomas had grown up watching Barcelona, not because he had any particular connection to Spain, not because anyone in the family had ever been there, but because when he was 9 years old, he had seen Ronaldinho play a match on television, and something in the way that man moved with a soccer ball had lit something up inside him that never went out. He taped posters to his bedroom wall. He wore the jersey to school, even though none of his classmates knew what it was. He practiced free kicks in the backyard until his mother called him in for dinner, and then practiced a few more after. When he deployed for the last time, The one thing he asked his father to hold on to was his original Barcelona jersey, the one he had bought with money he saved doing yard work for the neighbors the summer he turned 12. Number 10 on the back. The letters worn soft from years of washing and wearing. He said he would wear it to a real game someday. He said when he got back, that was the first thing they were going to do together. Go see Ronaldinho play. Sit in the stands and watch the man who had made him fall in love with soccer do the thing he did better than anyone else on earth. He never got back. So Daniel folded the jersey into his leather bag. He drove 4 hours. He took the subway, and he stood outside the training facility of the club his son had loved, with no appointment and no plan, and nothing except the need to do something, anything, that felt like honoring the promise Thomas never got to keep. A security guard stopped him at the gate. Daniel explained, as clearly and quietly as he could, that he was not looking for anything dramatic. He was not looking for a photo or an autograph or access to anything he was not supposed to have. He just wanted to leave something, to leave the jersey somewhere inside the facility where it might mean something, rather than fold it in a bag in his truck for the rest of his life. The security guard's name was Miguel. He had worked that gate for 11 years. He had seen every kind of fan, every kind of story, every kind of request you could imagine. He would later say that he could not explain, even to himself, why this one was different. But it was different. He called someone. That someone called someone else. And 40 minutes later, Daniel was sitting on a bench inside the facility, and Ronaldinho was walking toward him still wearing his training clothes. Ronaldinho sat down on the bench next to Daniel without saying anything first. He looked at the jersey that Daniel had laid across his knees. He looked at the name on the back. He looked at Daniel's face. And then he said very simply, "Tell me about him." Daniel told him about Thomas for 40 minutes. He talked about the backyard free kicks and the bedroom posters and the yard work money and the jersey and the promise they made about the game they were going to see together. Ronaldinho did not check his phone. He did not look at the clock. He did not give any signal that he had somewhere else to be. He sat on that bench and he listened the way people listen when they understand that what is happening right in front of them is the most important thing happening anywhere in the world at that moment. When Daniel finished talking, there was a long silence. Then, Ronaldinho asked one question. He asked what section Daniel would be sitting in at Saturday's match. Daniel said he did not have a ticket to Saturday's match. He had not even thought about getting one. He had come to leave the jersey. That was all he had planned. Ronaldinho nodded slowly. He stood up, shook Daniel's hand, and walked back toward the training field. He did not make any promises. He did not say anything dramatic. He just walked away. Daniel sat on that bench for another few minutes, then picked up his leather bag and went back through the gate and took the subway back to his truck and drove 4 hours home. He did not expect to hear anything else. He told himself it was enough that he had come, enough that someone had listened, enough that the jersey was somewhere other than a bag in his truck. He told himself that was all he had needed. He almost believed it. On Friday morning, his phone rang. It was a woman from the club's operations office. She told him there was a ticket waiting for him at the will call window for Saturday's match. She said it was in the north section of the upper deck. She said the seat number was written on the envelope. She said to come early. Daniel did not say anything for a moment. Then he asked who had arranged it. The woman on the phone paused and then said she had been told to say it was from a friend who wanted to make sure the right person was in the right seat. He drove 4 hours again on Saturday. He took the subway again. He collected the envelope from the will call window and found his seat in the north section of the upper deck and sat down with Thomas's jersey folded on his lap and 80,000 people filing in around him and the field green and bright below. Subscribe right now and leave a comment, because what happens next is the part of this story that no sports documentary has ever captured. The match kicked off. Barcelona was pushing forward from the first whistle, moving the ball with that particular kind of fluid confidence that comes from a team that knows exactly what it is capable of. Ronaldinho was everywhere. He received the ball on the left, drifted right, played it back, made a run, received it again 15 yards further up the pitch. The crowd rose and fell with every touch. The tension was the kind that fills your chest and does not leave. But between plays, something was happening that the television broadcast never caught. Ronaldinho was scanning the stands. Not the way players sometimes look up at a crowd without really seeing anything. He was looking with intention, looking for something specific, looking for someone. In the 41st minute, he found him. Daniel was sitting exactly where the ticket said he would be, in the north section, holding Thomas's jersey against his chest with both hands. Ronaldinho spotted him from 60 yards away and held the look for just a moment before the ball came back to him and the play continued. But something had shifted. Something in the way he moved changed slightly, the way a piece of music changes when a new instrument enters a phrase. The first half ended scoreless. During the break, something unusual happened in the locker room. One of the equipment staff would describe it later. Privately, to a journalist who agreed not to publish the specific details for years. He said that Ronaldinho sat quietly in the corner for most of halftime. He did not talk about tactics. He did not talk about the match. He looked at something in his hand for a long time. Nobody could see what it was. Then he put it away and walked back out to the tunnel, and the second half began. The 67th minute. Barcelona pressing forward, Valencia defending deep and hard, the kind of grinding defensive display that makes the whole stadium tense and lean forward in their seats. Ronaldinho picked the ball up at the center line. He had space in front of him. He had teammates making runs on both sides. He had every option a player in that position dreams of having. He took 2 touches forward and then stopped, completely stopped, let the ball roll 2 feet past him, turned around slowly and looked up at the north section of the upper deck. The referee was blowing his whistle. The assistant coaches were on their feet at the touchline. Players from both teams were looking at each other and then back at him, trying to understand what was happening. The crowd noise dropped by half in about 4 seconds, which in a stadium holding 80,000 people is a sound unlike anything you have ever heard, like a wave retreating from a beach all at once. Ronaldinho started walking toward the sideline. The referee jogged after him, card in hand. Ronaldinho did not acknowledge him. He stepped over the advertising boards at the edge of the pitch. The security personnel along the barrier looked at each other and then stepped aside, because there was something in the way he was moving that made it very clear this was not a situation any protocol had been written to address. He went up the stairs, past the lower rows, past the startled faces and the phones being raised and the voices saying his name in confused and rising tones. He climbed to the north section of the upper deck and walked along the row until he was standing directly in front of Daniel Herrera. Daniel looked up at him. He did not understand. He could not process what he was seeing. The most famous soccer player in the world was standing in front of him in a stadium of 80,000 people in the 67th minute of a professional match. Oh, and the entire building had gone completely silent. Ronaldinho sat down in the empty seat next to him. He did not say anything right away. He looked at the jersey that Daniel was holding. He looked at Daniel's face. And then he reached into the collar of his own jersey and pulled out something small that he had been wearing against his skin throughout the entire match. It was a photograph, worn at the edges, slightly creased from being folded and unfolded many times. It was a photograph of Thomas, taken from the small collection of pictures Daniel had left with him at the training facility 3 days earlier, along with the handwritten note. Ronaldinho had been carrying it against his heart the entire match. He held it out to Daniel. He said, "I wanted him here too." Daniel's hands shook when he took the photograph. He could not speak. He pressed the photograph and the jersey together against his chest and looked at the field below and could not say a single word. Ronaldinho stayed in that seat for 3 minutes. He did not make a speech. He did not do anything for the cameras because most of the cameras were still trying to figure out where to point. He just sat there with a father who had lost his son in a seat that should have belonged to a 26-year-old who had loved this club his whole life and never gotten the chance to come and see them play. Then Ronaldinho stood up. He took Thomas's jersey, the number 10 jersey with the worn letters and the 12-year-old's yard work money in every thread, and he held it up so both of them were holding it. He nodded once. He said something that Daniel has never repeated to anyone, and Daniel has said he never will. All those words belong to that moment and that seat and nobody else. Then Ronaldinho walked back down the stairs and crossed the sideline and stepped back onto the pitch. The stadium had been silent for 4 minutes. When his foot touched the grass, something broke open in the crowd. It did not start as applause, exactly. It started as a sound, a low and collective exhale from 80,000 people, all releasing something at the same moment. And then it became applause. And then it became something louder than applause, something that did not have a precise name, but that everyone in that building felt move through their body like a current. The players from the opposing team were clapping. The referee put his card back in his pocket without a word. The head coach, he who had been standing at the sideline with his arms crossed and his expression unreadable, uncrossed his arms and stood very still and said nothing at all. The match resumed. Ronaldinho played the final 23 minutes as if the weight of something enormous had been lifted off him and replaced with something else, something that moved differently, something that did not slow him down but changed the quality of everything he did. He found teammates in spaces that seemed impossible. He moved through defensive lines like the defenders were thinking 1 second slower than he was. In the 79th minute, he picked up the ball 30 yards from goal and struck it with his right foot on a trajectory that the goalkeeper did not begin to read until it was already inside the net. He did not run to the corner flag. He did not slide on his knees. He stood where he had struck the ball and looked up at the north section of the upper deck and raised one hand. Not a fist, just an open hand, palm out, like he was placing it against a window. Like he was saying, "This one is yours." Barcelona won the match. The final score does not matter, and most people who were there cannot tell you what it was without thinking for a moment. What they remember is not on any scoreboard. After the final whistle, Ronaldinho did not go straight to the locker room. He went up into the stands one more time. Not to the north section. He went to the club's guest area, where a staff member had quietly moved Daniel during the second half so he would have better access to the exit. Ronaldinho found him there, and they stood together for a few minutes while the rest of the stadium emptied out around them. Daniel would say later, in the one interview he ever gave, about that day, that Ronaldinho did not try to fix anything. He did not say the things that people say when they are trying to make grief smaller or neater or easier to carry. He just stood there. He was just present. And that, Daniel said, was the thing he had not known he needed. Not words, not gestures, not a famous person acknowledging his son's life in some public and documented way. Just someone willing to simply be there in the middle of the loss without flinching or looking away. What happened after that day was never announced. No press release, no charity campaign with Ronaldinho's name attached, no documentary crew granted access. What happened was smaller and quieter than any of that, and for that reason it lasted longer than any of that would have. Every year, on the anniversary of Thomas's death, a package arrived at Daniel's house. Inside was always the same thing, a handwritten note, never more than a few sentences, always signed with just a first name, and a match ticket for whatever game Barcelona happened to be playing nearest to that date. The seat number was always different, but the section was always the same. North Upper Deck, the same section where a father had sat with a jersey and a photograph on a Saturday afternoon when the most famous soccer player in the world decided that the most important thing he could do with 11 minutes left in a tied match was climb into the stands and sit down next to a stranger. Daniel still has every ticket. He has never used a single one. He keeps them in an envelope with the photographs and the handwritten notes and Thomas's jersey, which Ronaldinho returned to him that day after the game, now signed across the number on the back in black marker with 3 words underneath the signature. He was here. Years after that afternoon, a journalist who had been in the press box that day wrote a long piece trying to reconstruct exactly what had happened and why. He interviewed the referee, 2 of the players from the opposing team, 3 members of the Barcelona coaching staff, the security guard Miguel, and a dozen fans who had been sitting within 20 rows of Daniel in the North Upper Deck. He collected every detail he could find. At the end of the piece, he wrote one paragraph that he said he had spent more time on than any other paragraph he had ever written. It went like this: "We talk constantly about what sports are for. We build arguments about competition, about excellence, about the human capacity to push past limitation. We track statistics, and we rank performances, and we debate which moments in athletic history were truly great and which ones only seemed that way. But on that Saturday afternoon, in the 67th minute of a match that is not remembered for its final score, a man did something that none of those frameworks were ever built to contain. He looked at the scoreboard and decided it was less important than a seat in the North Upper Deck. He looked at the clock and decided it could wait. He looked at 80,000 people watching him and decided that the only one who really mattered in that moment was one man sitting alone with a jersey and a photograph. And in doing that, he reminded every single person in that building why they had come in the first place. Not to watch a score change, to feel something true. Ronaldinho never spoke publicly about that afternoon. When journalists brought it up in press conferences, he would smile and redirect the conversation. When interviewers pushed harder, he would say only that there are things that belong to the people who were part of them, and that making them public would make them smaller than they were. He said that once, clearly, and after that most journalists stopped asking. But there is one thing, he said, not in an interview, but in a conversation with a former teammate who later shared it. He said that the day he retired, when he sat in his house and tried to think about what he was actually proud of, it was not the trophies, and it was not the goals, and it was not the highlight clips that still circulate online with hundreds of millions of views. It was the 72 hours leading up to that match. The security guard who made a call he did not have to make. The bench where he sat for 40 minutes and listened. The photograph he wore against his skin through the whole game. The 3 minutes in a seat in the north upper deck. The way a man's hands shook when he was handed a picture of his son. He said those 72 hours were the truest thing he ever did with his life. And if you ask anyone who was in that stadium what they remember, they will not tell you about the goal in the 79th minute. They will tell you about the silence. The 4 minutes when 80,000 people held their breath together, not because they were watching something exciting, but because they were watching something real. The kind of real that you only get a few chances to see in a lifetime, and that you recognize immediately when it is in front of you, even if you have never seen it before. Because some things do not require explanation. Some things land in your chest before your brain has finished processing what your eyes are seeing. Some moments are not about the sport at all. They just happen to take place inside it. Daniel Herrera still lives in the same small town. He still drives the same truck. Every year on the same Tuesday in the same spring, he takes Thomas's jersey out of the envelope and lays it on the kitchen table and sits with it for a while. He does not watch much soccer anymore, but he still knows every result from every Barcelona match. He checks the score every time they play. He says he does not fully understand why he still does that. He says maybe it is just that some habits outlast the reasons you started them. Or maybe it is something else. Maybe it is just that certain things, once they mean something to you, never fully stop meaning it, no matter what comes after. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Every week we bring you the moments from sports that the highlight reels leave out. The stories that happen off the field, between the statistics, all behind the cameras. The ones that remind you what any of this was ever actually for. Leave a comment below and tell us what this story made you feel. We read every single one.